Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my June wrap up for the books that I read this month. This month I read 15 books, and I feel like a lot of them were ones that people either like rave about or they're like book talk famous or something like that. And I'm going to use my Goodreads here to help me out with what I thought about some of these and just like the order of which I read them. So with my 15 books that I've read, I have a giant stack right here. So let me just go ahead and get started because it will probably be a long video. So first book that I read is, again, one of those very popular books, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Now, I went into this book with really high hopes. I ended up giving it 5 stars, I believe. Yes, on my Goodreads, I gave it 5 stars. But now, after reading some of these books this month, I feel like it's like a 4.8, 4.9 situation. Like, I feel like it's definitely really high up there, but I don't know if I would necessarily give this like a hands down 5. I love that it felt like a realistic biography, even though it was about a totally fictional character. I really liked the way it was told. The life of Evelyn Hugo was very interesting. So when you were reading the biography portion, or kind of like her interview for the biography portion, there was always something going on, and I really wanted to keep reading. I never wanted to put this book down because I wanted to know what was next in Evelyn Hugo's life. But I don't know if it was like end all be all best book in my mind, if that makes sense. Alright, and next book I read this month was Such a Fun Age. I was on the just I really liked the story, but I think at times it was a little slow. It took me a long time to get into it, and I feel like it could have just been more eventful in general. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Again, it's a good book. I would recommend it if you're interested in it, but when I was hearing about it and reading the back of it, I was interested. It's about an African-American babysitter who babysits a family of white children, and she has an incident in a grocery store, and it kind of follows her life and situation with the family after that. And it doesn't revolve around that incident necessarily. It also includes a little like coming of age. Like, she's in her mid-20s, she's trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. And I think for the right person this could be very endearing, like the coming of age, finding yourself type of situation. But I don't know if it was necessarily done in a way that I liked it. It was just kind of boring. Like I said, like, yes, it was a coming of age, but it wasn't like an eventful coming of age. And then next, I fell in love with this book. I am a sucker for like a rom-com, and this was the epitome of a rom-com, and this is The Unhoneymooners. I gave this 5 stars, and I stick by my Goodreads 5-star rating on this. Now, I get where people are coming from with the main character, Ethan. He is supposed to be that like cringy, unlikable character, but honestly, I ended up really liking him. I like knew he was supposed to be like that, so it didn't really bother me. I think people tried to take him too seriously, and then they were like, he's unlikable. I kind of went into it knowing that he was unlikable, so it didn't bother me at all. The other thing that's really funny about this book is I feel like some people reading this would be like, this is a very unrealistic situation. So essentially, in this book, the bride and the groom get married, they have their wedding, but at the wedding, the guests and the bride and the groom get food poisoning. So the bride and groom can't go on their honeymoon, so they need to send their brother and sister on the honeymoon instead, and they're like arch nemesi? That didn't sound right. But anyway, they are not fans of each other, and then it's kind of just following their journey of this honeymoon together. But people say this is very unrealistic, which I find is very funny, because at my mom and my dad's wedding, this same sort of situation happened. Not to the extent to which it happened, but at my parents' wedding, people did get food poisoning from the fish or shellfish or whatever, like is in this book, which I just find quite comical. I feel like people think it's unrealistic, but honestly, like, hearing from my parents, it's just funny that that actually happens. And then next book that I read this month was Beach Read. Now, this one, I think on Goodreads I gave 5 stars. Okay, I actually gave this 4.5 stars on Goodreads. Well, I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, but I wrote in the comments 4.5 stars. It really bothers me that Goodreads doesn't do half stars. I think I said that in the last video, but I gave this 4.5 stars. I think that's because I went into this book with such high hopes. This is one that just everyone raves about, and I feel like I liked it, but it didn't live up to that hype that every single person and their mother who talked about this book said it was. So this book is about 2 characters who are trying to write a book, and they're kind of in like a little funk, and so they switch genres and try to write a book for each other, and it's just kind of like follows their journey of these two characters. And I think what my problem was with this book, what would have made it 5 stars, is that I didn't fall in love with the characters. Like, I loved the storyline, I loved the plot and everything, and it was really well written, but I didn't necessarily like fall in love with the characters, so I just kind of didn't care as much, if that makes sense. A lot of people are obsessed with the characters, Augustus and January, so see, that's kind of my point right there. Like, they didn't stick with me. And then the next book that I read this month is a very random book. I actually read one of the other books in this series last month, and I unknowingly read like the 3rd one in the series, but they didn't really all have to go together. So this is the White Girl Problems book by Babe Walker. So last month I read American Babe, and apparently this is like the 2nd or 3rd book in the series, I believe, but it is more just about this girl's life than kind of like a singular storyline. But it's really interesting because I flew through this book because there was a lot of things that were talked about in that book, like introduction to characters that I already knew about, so I kind of had to like skip the back. Like, I kind of just skimmed over some of these sections because it was like backstory on the characters that they already kind of explained into further detail in that book. I really like these books. They're really funny. It's just a really light, easy read in between some of these more like dense, heavier, just straight romance after romance after romance. It's fun to add a little comedy in there everywhere. I gave this one a 4 stars. I wrote funny, easy read, but liked her 3rd book better. And that is true. I liked that 3rd book way better than I liked this one. And then the next book that I read was In 5 Years. And going into this book, I had no idea what it was about, but just by the title, I feel like I knew what it was about. I assumed it was about what this girl's life would be like in 5 years, like what she like saw her 5-year plan to be. And it does have a lot of that aspect in it, but it had a lot more than what I kind of remember. So I gave this a 4.8 stars. Thinking back on it now, it's probably like a 4.6, 4.7 if we're really getting technical here. What I wrote was 4.8 stars, but big cancer trigger warning. So that is true. There is a big cancer trigger warning in this. If that is something that triggers you, I don't know if you would enjoy this book. It kind of seemed to like take over the book. Like, the first 1/4 of the book had nothing to do with it, and then it came out of nowhere and like took over the last 3/4 of the book, which didn't bother me necessarily, but I didn't think they needed to push it to that extreme. I feel like they could have talked about some of the other characters a little more than kind of just like harp on this one character's health. Granted, it has a lot to do with the storyline, like the entire plot revolves around it, and there is like kind of a plot twist at the end. I feel like they did have a really good hook at the beginning, and I wanted to read this entire thing as fast as I could to find out what went on at the beginning, like foreshadowing kind of situation. Alright, and then my next book kind of opened up a whole can of worms for me. So my next book that I read this month was Ugly Love. I actually found this at a thrift store. It was like $1 or 50 cents or something. And when I saw this, I grabbed it right away because I just knew this was a popular book. I had no clue what this was about when I picked it up, but I read the back and was kind of like, yeah, let's give it a shot. Like, I knew Colleen Hoover was a very controversial big name. I feel like you were either like gung-ho about coho, like people are like all over TikTok and just like coho, and at first I was like, what the heck is a coho? Or like, I will do anything I can to bash Colleen Hoover. Like, there is absolutely no in between. When I read this book, I fell in love with Colleen Hoover. Since reading this book, I can't say it is my absolute favorite Colleen Hoover book, but it is still a 5 stars. I gave this one a 5 stars, and I still stand by the fact that this is 5 stars. But now after reading some of her other ones that I gave 5 stars, I feel like this is like this 5 star, and some of the other ones are like here 5 stars, if that makes sense. So this book, I loved. The plot twist at the end really got me. So this book I loved. Tate bothered me at the beginning. At the end, full circle, I was like, that explains your behavior. You kind of are valid for some of these, but you shouldn't have really acted upon it like that. But I understood where he was coming from. But let's be real, this book had a lot of like explicit scenes. Like, I would say 3/4 of this book is like spicy scenes, which didn't bother me, but it was just a lot. Thinking back on it now, like when I was reading it, I read it so quickly. I read it in one day, like on an airplane ride, that I just kind of was like, oh, that's what it's about. Like, it has this a lot in it. But then I thought back on it and I was like, holy cow, that was like the majority of the book was spicy scenes. So if that's not your thing, this is not your book. But I honestly really love this book, and the ending just got me. And then immediately after finishing Ugly Love, I went right into Christina Lauren's Love in Other Words. This was another one that was so hyped up, and it actually lived up to the hype for me. I really like this book. Now, these were characters that I actually fell in love with. Macy and Elliot were fantastic through this book. I loved their story, and the end got me. This is like another one that just, the end wrecked me. This is one where childhood friends to lovers, childhood friends to enemies, they go without talking for years. This one made sense why they didn't go for talking. That didn't make sense. This one makes sense why they didn't talk for so many years. And it hurt to read. Like, I genuinely was like, oh my god, this is intense. I love this book. 100% stand by 5 stars for this book. Wish this was made into a movie or had a sequel or something. I am in love. And then next we really switched it up and went for a memoir. This is one of the first memoirs I think I've read as a grown adult. This is Freckled, a memoir of growing up wild in Hawaii. I actually got this at a thrift store, same thrift store that I got Ugly Love at, for 50 cents, and I just was kind of intrigued by it. I've always loved Hawaii. I've always been like a beachy girl, and this just seemed so interesting to me. It's basically the story of this family who grew up wild in Hawaii. Like, they literally like didn't have houses, they were homeless for a while, they lived in tents, they squatted, they had some houses, they lived like crazy lifestyles. It was obviously in the 70s, there was some like things that the parents were doing. It's just a very interesting read. I think I gave this, let me check, I gave this a 4 stars. Thinking back on it now, I feel like it's like a really like dead even 4-star or like 3.9. It's probably like 4-star. The beginning was slow for me, but then I got into it, and this girl's life is just insane. And then after Freckled, I read Bad Blood. This was one that my mom gave me to read, and this story is so interesting. If you have not heard about this story, you need to either look into it, read this book, or watch the movie, or it's a series or movie, I don't know. I have to watch the movie or series still. But when my mom was explaining this book to me, she was like, you need to read this when I'm finished. And she was like, you just won't believe that this actually happened. And she is so right. So this is The Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. So this is essentially a story of a girl who dropped out of college and started this whole medical blood testing technology, sold it to Safeways, that's like the grocery stores, sold it to Walgreens, sold it to these very big name companies for billions of dollars, and it was a scam. Like, it was all a scam, and it just blows my mind how this actually happened, like how people believed it, how there were so many employees that knew what was actually happening, and still it just like this company and this girl got away with it. Now, speaking of the book specifically, I gave this a 3 stars. I think I put 3 stars, but it's a 3.5. So I said 3.5 stars. The storyline is insane to think how someone got away with this, though I don't like how this book was written. There was at least 100 names of people, when in reality there was probably only 20, if that many, names that were actually important enough to label by name. So again, the story of this is insane. This particular book, I just did not like how many characters there are. If there are too many characters in a book, I start to tune them out, because I'm like, are you important? Are you not? This got to that point where it was like naming specific, like they could have as well named a Starbucks barista that they stopped at one morning before they went to work. Like, they were just naming so many people that I was like, you didn't need to name drop, you didn't need to name drop, you didn't need to, because they talk about it for one line and then never again. So that bothered me. If you're interested in this topic, either research it yourself or watch the movie or something. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend this book unless you're like really into all the details of it. And this next book is what really started my love, my obsession, everything with my Colleen Hoover. So November 9th, whatever you would like to call it. This book, like, I am obsessed with. I finished this in one day as well. I could not put this down for the life of me. Thinking back, talking to friends, I understand that this concept of this book is not realistic. I get that. But I fell in love with Fallon and Ben. Like, I don't know what it is, but essentially this book is about, you probably all have heard, seen all the TikToks about it, but it's this book about these teenagers who meet one day, and Fallon, the main character, decides she needs to go her separate ways, and she doesn't want to date Ben because she literally just met him for one day. But they decide to meet up every November 9th for 5 years and then kind of reassess the situation of what they're like, if they still like each other, kind of just where their lives have taken them. They didn't have any kind of commitments to each other, so they would literally just meet up every November 9th. But as the story unfolds, I just was blown away. I cried, I laughed, I loved, all of the things with this book. I cannot say enough amazing things about this book. I am a hopeless romantic deep down, and this is the epitome of a hopeless romantic book. And literally 20 pages into that book, I ordered another one of her books on Amazon. So I was going to get it the next day, and that was Reminders of Him, because that was perfect, because I finished that book in one day and then started this immediately after. I honestly didn't even read the back. Like I said, I ordered it on Amazon for it to deliver the next day. I had no clue. I just saw it and was like, yes, add to cart, send me right now. So the two main characters in this are Kenna and Ledger, but Ledger I loved. He was right-minded, he was kind, just everything. I loved him. So this is about Kenna, who is in jail, who did something when she was young, and it was a tragic mistake, and she couldn't essentially face what happened, and so she ended up going to jail for it. And this is a story about her life after getting out and trying to kind of reconnect to her previous life before she went into prison. This is one of the first Colleen Hoover books that didn't necessarily have a crazy plot twist at the end. I kind of saw it coming, but it was just so good. I was hooked the entire time. So after Reminders of Him, I decided I need to order another Colleen Hoover book, but it didn't come in time for me to read it the literal moment this one ended, so I needed to pick something else. So I forced myself to pick another one that I had, and I chose Whacked, about this character Danny, who had a picture perfect lifestyle, but then she found out her boyfriend was cheating on her. Her life kind of goes to shambles, but they always reference the word oh, she's so whack, when they say oh, this girl's crazy. And then at first when I read the title, I was like, what in the world is whacked, until I was reading the book and they start to reference things as oh, that's so whack, and I didn't think of it that way because I've never seen whacked in that tense. But yeah, so they basically would say oh, that's whack, crazy, and they would say it in things like that girl's so crazy, that girl's so whack, things that she did, Crazy Stalker X kind of vibes. I feel this ending, I was just kind of shocked by it. I wasn't expecting. I loved. It was great. I feel like most authors don't kind of end in this way, which was interesting. I liked it. It was very good. If you ever see this and you want a crazy girl Stalker X vibe, this is the one for you. Very interesting. And then right after that, I went back into my Colleen Hoover jam and read It Ends With Us. And again, a few pages into this, I pre-ordered It Starts With Us. So I'm ready. I'm strapped. I'm so ready to go. But this one, I can't say it was one of my favorites. I again gave it 5 stars. It kind of goes back to the level of ugly love for me. It didn't top Reminders of Him and November 9th, but I still really, really loved this book. So when I read the ending, I was kind of okay, it was very believable. I could have guessed it right away. I knew how it was going to end. It wasn't a shocking ending like most of her other reads are, but it was realistic. It was that makes sense. And at the time, I was I don't know if I want that to be the ending. I want it to be something more. I want it, I don't know. I was just eh. And then I read the epilogue and I was okay, I'm fine with it. And as I sat on it more, I realized that it makes sense. This is how it should be. It ended how it should, not how I kind of wanted this picture perfect ending to be, if that makes sense, but was okay with it. So again, 5 stars. Don't know if I'd name it the highest of high 5 stars, but still really, really liked it. And then after that, I decided to finish Where the Crawdads Sing. So I started this last month actually, and I was I can't do it. It just, at the beginning, it really bothered me. The language, I just couldn't get. I had to genuinely think about what they were saying in this book. The southern accent was so strong, And then I was like, I'm just gonna force myself to finish it. I hate leaving books unfinished. So I was like, I'm just gonna push through. So yesterday I pushed through and I finished the whole thing. And I'm kind of glad I did. It took me a long time to get into. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I said, this book had such a slow start for me. I can't say I really got into it until about 150 pages in. It got better for me once Kaya learns to read and English gets better, but the accent at the beginning made it really hard to passively read. I hate to say that the end was expected, but it was. So it was just kind of like an average read for me. But again, it took me 150 pages to even like get interested in this book, and then it got better once the main character learns how to read and learns to write in English. Her kind of dialogue in this book makes it a lot easier to follow as well. I couldn't passively read at the beginning of this book. I had to genuinely sit there and think, what is this girl saying? Because I just couldn't do it. It got better. I'm very intrigued to see the movie. Is this my favorite book ever? No. Am I glad I read it? Maybe. It's kind of one of those things where it was one of the New York Times bestsellers. I'm glad I did it. Wouldn't do it again. And then today I finished this book, The Secret Hum of a Daisy. This is one that I randomly picked up at the thrift store. It was another 50-cent situation. And I read the back and was like, okay, sounds kind of cool. This I ended up giving, I didn't even do my Goodreads for it. I literally just finished it before filming this video. I think I will give this a 3.89 stars. Not 4 stars, not yet 3.5. Like, it's in between. It's like a high 3, low 4. It was interesting. If you are into like signs and kind of like that sort of thing after someone passes away, this is very interesting. It's about a girl, Grace, who her mom passed away, and growing up it was only her and her mom. They moved around a lot. She was a single mom, and she was a teen mom too, until one day her mom passes away and she has to go live with her grandma that she knows nothing about, and she kind of finds these clues and little signs from her mom. And the ending, to me, I feel like the ending of a book really kind of makes or breaks my rating scale, and the end was just blah, which is why my rating is blah. I feel like it could have gone so many different ways, but they just kind of took an easy way out. So those were the 15 books that I read in the month of June. I'm really hoping to kind of keep up the stamina this next month for July. But if you have any more video requests, please leave them down below. I would love to hear from them and make videos on them. I will see you all soon. Bye.